Hi, my name is Vicky Jimpson-Fludd. I'd like to welcome you to the Van Hoesen Marriott House fundraiser. I am the chairman of the board of the Jan van Hoesen Charles Marriott House Preservation Project. While our board of directors is quite small for operational reasons, our advisory board consists of historians, archaeologists, and others who, based on their expertise, were specifically chosen to work on this project. Audience members will immediately recognize many of their names: Wally Wheeler, Bill Krattinger, Paul Stewart, Donna Bruno. Claverack town historian Jean Laporta has recently agreed to join our board of directors, and Hudson attorney Carl Whitbeck has given generously of his time as our pro bono attorney. Moreover, as you will see in this film, many others, Fergus Bordovich, David Voorhees, Brenda Schufelt, Lisa Flood Smith, as well as noted academics Andrea Mosterman and Michael Duma, have all lent their support to this project. As you know, the house is one of the most historically significant houses in Columbia County. Due to its Dutch vernacular provenance, this house is a nationally registered historic site. Built in the 1700s, the house was a site of enslavement because the Van Hoesens, like many of their neighbors, were slaveholders. But by the 1800s, when it was owned by Quaker abolitionist Charles Marriott, the house had allegedly become a station on the Underground Railroad. If only this house could talk. Because of its history, which is spread over many generations, this house deserves our attention. In developing our plan for the house, our project team realized that to do justice to its history, we could not simply restore the house to one specific period of time. Instead, we will focus our efforts on stabilizing and preserving the house to prevent further deterioration. While Ed Klingler, our executive director and site manager, has worked lovingly on the house for many, many years without adequate funding, even Ed's diligent efforts are for naught. Our plans include acquiring the property and commissioning several important studies, which include an HSR, which is a historic structures report, which will serve as our guide in determining our studies in other studies that need to be undertaken. We will also do a dendrochronology report, which will tell us about the age of the wood used in the house's construction. And we will excavate the entire basement back to its original level to search for artifacts. In 2011, a smaller but similar study was conducted by the New York State Museum. That study discovered more than 600 artifacts, which are now housed there. Among other topics, those artifacts included shards of Dutch pipes and even oyster shells, providing further proof that the Hudson River was quite different in earlier days. In all cases, we will hire professional consultants to guide us, and in many cases to actually do the work. Funding will also allow us to document the Van Hoesen family history for our permanent online collection. I use the word online because ultimately the house will be a study house for scientists, historians, and other academics to further their knowledge of the 17 and 1800s. In contrast, the general public will be able to visit the house on scheduled guided tours led by Ed Klingler. Casual visitors or visitors to our website will be able to view the interior of the house, learn about its provenance and other historical information through a series of videos, which will be accessible on the website and on way signs located outside the house. So how much will all of this cost? We think an initial budget of $300,000 will get us on our way. Now, how can you help? Well, if you don't happen to have that amount of cash just laying around, just donate whatever you can. No donation is too small or too large. And if you know of any corporate or institutional entities or others who might like to make a sizable donation, please send us an email at vanhoesenmarriott@gmail.com and we'll contact them. Our new website is at www.vanhoesenmarriotthouse.com vanhosen.org. There, you can donate using a credit card or PayPal. There, you will also find all of the information from our old website presented in an updated format, including a contact page for messages and donations. Or you can send a check to the Van Hoesen Marriott House Project, P.O. Box 254, Claverack, New York, 12513. I'll repeat. The Van Hoesen Marriott House Project, P.O. Box 254, Claverack, New York, 12513. And now, let's get on with our show. It was produced by local filmmaker James Cave, without whose artistic know-how this fundraising project would not have been able to get off the ground. Thank you for attending. James?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Van Hoesen House. Not quite as nice a day as it was during our last session, but James is here with me to document a little more information to share. Today we're going to be talking primarily about areas of the house where enslaved people would have probably been most prominently featured. So we're going to start with the basement, and we'll go from there. Well, aware of the house for over 60 years. It caught my interest in the early 60s as a young boy and has really been a cornerstone of my life. It provided a path for me, my career as an adult, as a restoration carpenter, and I am the one person who has kind of seen it through as people have come and gone and added to our overall approach to what we're doing. And hopefully now, after 20 years and me being here to try and maintain it and keep some of the weather out, it looks like 2025 will finally be that year for the house. Well, I think first we need to understand, although this basement is currently wide open, originally it was separated into two areas. To the west we had the original basement kitchen, is where the enslaved people would probably spend a lot of their time preparing meals and the like.
The Van Hoesen Marriott House is a really unique home. There are not many buildings left from that era because a lot were built out of wood and they have gone away, but this house is built out of brick.
The Van Hoesen House itself is one of a group of probably less than 20 houses that predate the Revolution that are of wood frame construction and which have a brick sheathing. It's a kind of a composite construction. The brick is actually keyed into and around the framing. So it's a very rare building technique, and it was popular up until about just before the Revolution.
So it's definitely a Dutch family, and it's a Dutch house, and always has been. It's always been considered a Dutch house. The Van Hoesens owned a lot of the land around Hudson, so they owned big farms. This house, at one time probably had 500 or 600 acre farm, and included parts of what are now parts of Stockport, Greenport, and Hudson. It's right on the edge of Hudson. So my father, he was born in 1912, was a surgeon in Hudson. He always told me that the house, where the mobile home park is now, it's an old Dutch house, and it's right close to a main road in Columbia County, and we saw it all the time. He always told me that it was owned originally by one of my ancestors, who he called a Netja Whitbeck, and I have a family tree of my family that goes back to 1616. So, of course, I always had an interest in the house, although it was on a mobile home park property, wasn't open to the public. People talked about it all the time, that it should be protected, should be preserved.
One of the things about the Van Hoesen house, it's so visible from Route 66. People drive by the trailer park and can see it from there. And it's clearly a historic home that needs to be restored. It's one of the few homes of Dutch architecture with those particular features and from that particular time period that are even left standing in this area.
It has stood for all of this time. So it has the history from the 1700s when it was built. Also, it has the history of being a space of enslavement, because we know that the Van Hoesens were enslavers.
Bear in mind that until the 1820s, New York State was a slave state. New York State was a slave state. There were plenty of enslaved people in New York State and significantly in the Hudson River Valley.
So when you see that New York slavery is Dutch and domestically grown and traded within the networks of New York and New Jersey, you see it now as more of a self-contained unit of a certain type of culture, a certain type of slavery, of people that are connected. And I know you asked me ahead of time the difference between Dutch and English slavery and how slavery was different in the Hudson Valley. And there's a lot of subtle things to be said about that. It's very difficult. There is a distinct Dutch slavery. And I estimate over time, using demographic techniques, that in the 18th century, so the 1700s alone, there were somewhere between 22 and 25,000 slaves in New York that spoke Dutch, something like that. I estimate it's about 40% of New York slaves that probably spoke Dutch at some point.
So when thinking of the experiences of enslaved people in these homes in the Hudson Valley, one of the things that's important is kind of thinking about where in the house were they located. So oftentimes they were in either like attics, garret spaces, or in the cellar, which I believe is where the enslaved people at the Van Hoesen house would have spent most of their time. And these spaces oftentimes were very small. They're oftentimes hot and warm in the summers, oftentimes where also kitchens were, which was the case in the Van Hoesen house. There's ways in which enslavers in these homes would have been able to kind of contain the movement or control the movement of the people who were living in this house by the way it's organized or how they would be able to monitor or watch them.
This property imbued with slavery, call it if you like a monument to slavery in the Hudson Valley, is acquired by an abolitionist, by a bold, radical abolitionist Quaker.
In the process of our research, we kept coming across the name of Charles Marriott, who was a noted abolitionist. And everyone in the area seemed to think, well, he lived here somewhere, but we didn't really know where.
We do know that Charles Marriott lived there with his sister. I think her name was Margaret Marriott, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe he died there. She owned the home. He lived there for several years. He's very connected with the Rokeby farm, where a lot of runaways came as they were on the Underground Railroad. And he was a big abolitionist. And you can see that in the obituaries about him. He was very public about it, which a lot of people were not. And they mention it in the obituaries as one of the main things about him and his life.
The Marriott House, and I'm going to call it the Marriott House because Marriott's my man, so to speak, and it's his history that led me to finding the house and helping to put together the underground route that passes through the area. But the house embodies the entire history of slavery and anti-slavery in the United States. It's embedded in that property. It's embedded in the bricks, even, so to speak, and in the earth that surrounds it.
If the house, in fact, was part of the Underground Railroad, and it was also a space of enslavement before that, I think it encapsulates in a way what the history of slavery in New York was. It shows how you can have both of those histories in the same space, like very literally, like the same building.
I think the Van Hoesen House is incredibly important to our area, but also to our country. Architecturally, it represents something that's very unique in Dutch architecture at the time.
The Van Hoesen House shows, or is a potential for showing, all these different aspects of early American history, which creates what we are today. And the issues that we have today are still a reflection of the world that they created in the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries.
It is a home that is so important to history, to colonial era history, to Dutch history, to African American history. It needs to be protected. It needs to be saved.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope that you were all able to hear that a little bit. This is the first time we've been using Riverside as a studio, and this is honestly the first time I've ever live streamed a screening of a film I made. So thanks for bearing with us if there were any technical difficulties, and thanks for spending part of your Sunday here with us today. I love seeing the chat. We've got some descendants of the Van Hoesens in the chat. I love to see that, and just feels like a digital family reunion of sorts. Feel free to use the chat and say hi and tell us where you're from as well. And we'll be using the chat later on in the program for a Q&A with Ed. So so think about your questions with Ed as we get to know him and hear a little bit more about the house. But my name is James Cave. I produced that film and some others on behalf of the African American Archive of Columbia County and the Van Hoesen House Historical Foundation, DBA, Jan Van Hoesen Charles Marriott House Preservation Project, which I will be calling the House Preservation Project going forward. Just some housekeeping and some links that I'd like to share with you as we get started. There is a newsletter that the Preservation Project has put together. And so, if you would like to subscribe to that, this is the link to do so there. So make sure you can click on that one. There's also a donation link for that Vicky showed earlier. And so if you'd like to make any donations or find it, spoiler alert, it's the same link. So you can just bookmark that one link. But if it's helpful, there they are for you as well. I also want to say that I know this event was publicized as a live streamed house tour, but unfortunately, due to some technical limitations, we were not able to do that today. But as an upsell, I think Ed has offered to take people on an in-person guided tour of the Van Hoesen Marriott House in Claverick at an upcoming Sunday. The date is still TBD. We're working through that. But if you subscribe to that newsletter, then you'll be the first to know. So speaking of Ed, I got to say, working on that film was really enriching, and it was a fascinating project. And I got to interview some really just fabulous historians, authors, and professors. And I was really excited to get to know Ed. I don't know if you know, Ed has been the primary caretaker, a guardian of this house for decades. I think he probably knows it more intimately than maybe anyone alive. He's just full of facts and histories and stories about the house. So I'm really excited to have him here today to get to know him a little bit better and to have a conversation about this place. So as we get to know, as I said, think about your questions that you might want to ask Ed, and we'll definitely be throwing them to him after our chat. So without any further ado, let's get to know Ed Klingler. Hi, Ed.
Hi. Hello, James and Vicky.
How's it going?
Well, doing all right here today, and looking forward to hopefully some interesting questions from our audience.
Yes, as well. Me too. Well, first you're going to sit through some questions from me. Okay. So I think first I want to go back to young Ed. Okay. Can we go back to young Ed? Ed's origin story with this house. I mean, you mentioned to me in our interview that it changed the trajectory of your life. So I was just wondering, how did you first become involved with the Van Hoesen house? Take us back to that. Like, were you growing up here? You were seeing it. Like, how did you get involved with it?
Well, it was a matter of growing up here. My family's originally from the greater New York City area, but been up here since the 50s. And as a single-digit boy in the early 60s, coming from the Chatham area down into Hudson for that shopping expedition, the house at that time just sat out in a field. And for whatever reason, my own proclivities, it just really captured my attention before I really knew much about old houses. The house just spoke of age. As a matter of fact, I just called it the Revolutionary War House just because it obviously was ancient. And, since that time, it just propelled me. While I think a lot of other kids were out playing baseball or whatever, I would just get on my bike and ride around the county to find more houses like it. And it just has been something that has propelled me my whole life. After graduating from high school, I did attend SUNY Albany with a liberal arts degree, but the whole time I've been doing this, I have worked in the trades, and eventually, after graduating from college, just continued. And it's been a rewarding career of over 50 years now, as I've continued to develop my knowledge, in particular about Dutch houses, and continue to work on them whenever I can.
That's great. Did this house teach you about, a lot about Dutch houses, specifically this house be really influential in your education there?
I think so, from the standpoint, what I would like to emphasize is there's just so much original fabric that has not been destroyed or removed that usually happens either generationally in, years gone by initially, or in this day and age, it just seems working in buildings. It's every new owner tears out the bathroom, no matter how good it is, because it's the wrong color. But this house has never suffered from that. It really has retained details, not only from the Dutch period, but some great improvements from the federal period when Hudson was being developed as a whaling center. During Marriott's time, it was relatively stable, but by the late 19th century, when the McKittrick family owned the building, substantial improvements were done. You see a lot of Victorian period woodwork, especially upstairs in the bedrooms. And then really the 20th century, not much was done except crude maintenance, but that also then speaks to kind of the economic times in this county. And it's really what led to the abandonment of the farm in the early 60s and it being purchased to develop into a mobile home park.
Yeah, you've been there for most of that. So I'm curious, you've seen it go through when you met it, it was in such disrepair. You've been working on it to bring it back to a certain standard of safety at least, and so it just doesn't fall apart. What is it like? How do you balance between this idea of what the study house and full on preservation? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that notion of the Van Hoesen Marriott House as a study house rather than a work of historic preservation, taking it to a back of an essence of a certain era of its time? For example, just going back to its early Dutch rather than everything else. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I would redefine that actually by keeping it as a study house. I mean, that is preservation. Restoration is when you look at available evidence and replace something that's missing, but you assume, based on percentages, would have been there when you choose a period to restore a house to. The other thing you can go with is just renovation, which is, of course, not a restoration, where in many urban districts you have, the brick storefront and a row of buildings up and down a main street in the town. They may save the facade, but the interior would be all new. Our intention is just to save everything that's there and focus on the things that need to be done to make the exterior weather tight. I would also like to speak to the archaeology. One of the most significant things we need to do at this point, besides acquiring the building and formally, is to get the basement excavated. As we heard Wally speak earlier, it's a wood frame encased in brick walls. And at this point, the wood frame is slowly decaying because of moisture and the like. So once the basement is excavated, then I can get down to good solid virgin ground and start cribbing up the house through the middle and carrying the frame to prevent this settling, which is causing a lot of the deterioration, the fissures in the walls. And it's really kind of the ground floor where we have to go from.
I wanted to ask you about some of the work that needs to be done right now, but before we get there, I'd like to ask you about what is some of the things that you've done in your time there this far. Like, what are some of the projects? Can you go through and tell us some of the things that you've worked on with the house so far?
At this point, the first major thing that was done is the porch that you see, which now has just an asphalt shingle repair in the middle, was literally falling off the house, and I think really having a detrimental effect on that facade, potentially pulling some of it away from the frame. So about 8 years ago, I got in, jacked it up, re-roofed it, straightened it out so that, that stress on the building itself was relieved. I'm currently working on the roof. We have a couple damaged roof panels, so with the good spring weather, I'll be up there repairing any panels that need to be damaged, trying to capture the parapets with a little bit of metal coping, and then getting a new coat of roof paint sealer on the roof. Silver coat is what we call it in the trades. Beyond that, I've cleaned the interior out once. To be in there now, just because of the amount of flaking paint and all that's precipitated, it looks like I've never been in there. But at one time it was vacuumed clean, and we'll go again. Also, I've closed up all the windows and sealed off whatever infiltration into the building of water and other elements I could deal with. But again, to do anything significant, we really need to get cracking on the archaeology and take a real bite out of this. In the meantime, once I'm done with the roof, certainly getting some glass back in some of the windows and, just making it a little more attractive, we can do that. At this point, as one person, I'm just trying to prevent further deterioration or at least slow it down as much as possible.
It's interesting. So you talk about putting windows in, and I'm curious to know what era. The house has seen so many different eras and so many different, styles of life of its, inhabitants. What era of window would you install?
Well, I'm just talking about replacing the glass in all the existing sash. Again, because it's a study house, we're not looking to, unless some major decision is made by the board in the future, to say, put the casement windows back into the original facade, which faces north away from Route 66 now. Parts of the frames are there, but as I've said in some of our conversations, you can't just pick and choose what you want to look at. For me, the framing for the center hall, that ceiling, is really fairly unique. It's enclosed, though, behind a plaster ceiling that was installed in the early 1800s or thereabouts. But, my thing would be that I would love to see that framing, but it doesn't fit with our philosophy of preservation. As I've said to both of you, maybe at some point we're going to be able to slide a camera down between the ceiling and those beams to at least see what's there.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about, speaking of seeing what's there, the basement has, it's so central to this story of this enslavement and Van Heusen's time. And so down there, what do we know about what might be can you just talk about that basement space right now as it is today and what it would have likely been like in the Van Heusen's time and the time of the enslaved, and also talk about a little bit about the fill that's down there and what we would love to have, what could be done there with the right funding to go and excavate that. Can you talk a little bit about what that project would look like?
Well, it would be an archaeological project, and so we would need to get a team in who would then lay everything out on a grid and just start digging down and documenting. It's essential, like I said, for both not destroying historic fabric that's trapped there in the soils. Also, though, for, like I said, my structural work that needs to be done. And also, it's very wet ground there. It's always been a problem with the house. I think that freezing, especially since the house is not heated, has contributed to some of the movement in the walls. So once it's dug down, the drain line for that small archaeology project you previously mentioned can be continued into the basement. At this point in time, that drain line does run up to the basement door. So it's ready to go.
Got it. And when we were down in the basement, you talk about this rumored hidden staircase, and you point out some of those features there. What have you found or not found about that staircase there?
Oh, well, you're probably referring to the reference to the tunnel, the secret underground. As I pointed out, that was actually a stoned up second entrance to the root cellar. And I apologize, I did not get into that. Basement was originally divided into two areas about equally. There was the kitchen with the basement fireplace, and the other half would have been this root cellar. So it just makes sense that, the folks doing the cooking then have access to whatever stored vegetables or potatoes or produce are there. But again, this closed up entrance at one point in time, it looked like you went out under the porch, so I can see, it just has the makings of a great folk tale, but there's absolutely no basis, when you actually empirically to look at it.
Yeah. Well, I want to close, but I want to ask you one more question because I wonder, you spent so much time there just amongst, by yourself, the house, doing work on it. When you walk through the house and you spend time there, do you ever feel the presence of all the lives lived there? Like, what do you feel when you're just sort of there in a quiet moment?
Well, I think what the house gives me is a nice sense of history, and I'm philosophical in the sense that it gives one that sense of a continuum that you're a part of, which is nice. It's a humbling thing. The other thing I still think about in the house, I particularly think of what younger persons, we're talking teenagers, or who may actually be inspired for the future. Once we're gone, we need people who can continue these interests and are still interested in preservation. And I've said it many times to visitors, probably the both of you, that, if this effort just results in one person becomes interested in some aspect of history or, historic preservation of the building, then this is successful. It's really done what the project was intended to do, how we set it up.
I think it's really remarkable how all this time you said that only one thing has ever been stolen from the house. Nobody's ever broken in and taken anything else, but there's that one piece. What was that piece?
Just judging from the ghost marks from where the pintles were removed, the door from the stair to the basement is missing. And I don't recall from my first visit in 1968 or 9, whenever I was there first, whether it was in place, but just it looks like it was removed, in the last 50 years. Other than that, there's never been even so much as a thrown rock through a window. But we can also thank, the trailer park for being there for that. And I think we have to remember the gentleman in the closest trailer. He was actually our caretaker for years until he got too old to do it. And there is an important aspect of this house providing an outlet for people in the park when we talk about all the benefits for all the groups that this house has the potential to kind of support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anybody has any information about that door out there, please let Ed know. You'd love to have it, I'm sure. Okay, I'm going to bring Vicki back in. Vicki, how are you doing?
Fine. It's a great film. I enjoyed it. And Ed, your remarks are always so informative. It's really great to be able to hear the history of the house and hear how someone who's been there for so many years, who really understands the house.
And I do want to,
thank you.
I want to second that for sure. And I want to thank you, Ed, for all your time guiding us through the house, answering my calls and saying, I just need to go to the house one more time for just a few more pictures. And then it's like 5 more calls. I'm like, I just need a few more scenes. So thanks for your patience on all of that as well. I want to know, I see that some folks are saying that maybe there's only sound from my microphone, or for some reason, Ed might be appearing upside down on his screen. This whole recording is recorded and will be uploaded as well onto the Archives YouTube channel. And the film that we shared today will also be uploaded onto the YouTube channel as well. So all of that will still be fine in that final recording. But I also wanted to ask Vicki, if people are watching today and, they want to help, you briefly touched on it at the beginning of the call, but in case they missed it or joined a little bit after, what is the most impactful thing that they could do?
The most impactful thing now is to send us some cash, because we really want to be able to get this program off the ground. It's been a long time coming. Ed has been working on it for years and has just not been able to get all the funding together. Now is the time. We have a very active group of a board of directors and an active advisory group, and this is the time. So if you can send us some cash, we'd appreciate it. We're also applying for grants, and we're going to be talking to corporate sponsors as well. So hopefully we'll be able to raise the money. But one of the things I also wanted to say is that we will be everyone that has attended the program. We will send a link to the YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel is not the Archives YouTube channel; it's the Van Hoesen Marriott House channel.
I didn't know there were multiple channels. We have a whole entertainment network. Amazing. Okay, well, let's get into some questions. Does anyone have any questions? I'm scrolling through the chat to see, and I wonder if anyone, let's see, any questions? A lot of great information, a lot of context from folks. Looking through. Vicky, I know you want to ask a question. You messaged me with a question once, and I saved it from the interview because I thought maybe Vicky would like to ask it. Is there anything you want to ask yet?
Yeah,
Well, one thing we had. Oh no, go ahead,
No, good.
Vicky.
I was just going to say, I think it would be interesting if Ed told us a little bit about his experience with Ruth Paiwanka, because she was involved with your project for a long, long time.
Yeah, well, Ruth was, as many probably watching this know, was the Columbia County historian. I respected her deeply for her depth of knowledge, but also a very kind of critical and rigorous academic approach. And the archive has certainly taken her initial research forward in a more positive vein, I think, to show the connection to the railroad. Ruth had done some initial research that you're aware of, but was always very clear that more work had to be done. And that was Ruth, not just as far as any kind of a railroad connection, but just anything you talk to Ruth about. She always had that great kind of level of caution in approaching and interpreting whatever the topic might be, which I at least always appreciated, because with these things, you really do need to always be approach it with a critical eye and try to avoid being dogmatic.
Yeah, I had never had the opportunity to meet Ruth, but because I'm fairly new to this project, my organization is about 3 years old. I'm also the executive director of the African American Archive, which, as I said, is 3 years old, and it's just been since I think last spring that the Van Hoesen House came on our radar. I'm also a steering committee member of the Underground Railroad Consortium of New York State. And a lot of people that I was working with were looking for Charles Marriott's house. And we finally talked to Brenda Schufel from the library, and she said, "Oh, I know where that house is." And then based on that, we were able to talk with Ed and be able to finally get together as a group to try to raise the funds to preserve this house.
And Ruth, as we know, she was doing some work into looking into Charles Marriott and his connection to the Underground Railroad, potentially with this specific site, right, Vicky?
Actually, she was. From what I understand, that's what she was working on when she passed. And it would be lovely if we were able to find out where those notes were. No one seems to know exactly where they are now, but it would be great if someone could point us in the direction of the notes, or let us at least see the notes or get a copy of it, so that we can find out what she has found out in terms of Charles Marriott's connection to the house. I mean, we have bits and pieces from here and there, even a portion of a letter that he wrote to the Rokebys up in Vermont about people passing through meaning the formerly enslaved who were passing through his property, and he was helping them go to Vermont. But it would be really nice to know from the local perspective what Ruth found out, because she has the continuity of the history of the house.
Well, I think I can add, Vicky, that Ruth's research was limited. She had just started it. There may be more in her papers I'm not aware of. We had busy schedules, so we only catch up occasionally. To the best of my knowledge and my conversations with her, she was seeing, and I think research at the courthouse through deeds and all, that there was this connection to Marriott. I think that's as far as she had gotten, at least as far as I know in her research. So it's unfortunately all I can really tell you about what she has done, and hopefully, her papers for both this and other topics she was dealing with can be located soon.
Nice lead. We'll certainly check up on that, and we do hope that we can find Ruth's papers.
Okay, we have a question from Ronnie. Question about the house. Who owns it now? How much land is the group hoping to buy along with the house, and what would the cost of the purchase? How much is the purchase of the house expected to cost?
Well, at the moment, the house is owned by the Dutch Village Trailer Mobile Home Park, and we've been talking with them. They're willing to sell us the property. We think it'll be between $30,000 to $40,000, and we're just taking the land that's closest to the house. It's in a floodplain, and I'll let Ed tell you more about the specifics of it. I'm more the money person and not the land person, but he can tell you more about it. Ed, exactly what are we asking for in terms of the house and the land?
Well, we know from our conversations with the owner that he has described an interest in ridding himself of the quote-unquote useless property. So that really fits in well, I think, with our goals. In my mind, and for many of us who've worked in the organization over the years, that really would include the land between Route 66 on the south, and there's a power line right away to the north. On the west, it's going to be the Claveret Creek, and then we pretty much have the driveway going into the park, so it'd be everything west of the driveway. Maybe one of the sticking points to figure out is where to draw the line between the house and the first group of trailers. I don't think it's a major point, but the idea would be to just take that line, whatever it is, between the house and the first line of mobile homes, and draw it back to basically the limits of the floodplain, the flood area, which again seems to coincide well with the backyards in that first line of trailers. So there's about 6 or 7 acres there, and this really represents, again, that rich floodplain along the creek is so important as far as the original environment of the house is concerned. That's where a lot of farming would have been done, the replenishing the soils from the springtime floods and the silt that keeps getting moved down a creek like that. These are the reasons that, these houses were built on kind of that first rise overlooking a floodplain. There was not a lot of competition, or at least the patentees were the ones that got the best land, the richest land, and that's where it was. So I think simply it's a matter of trying to take advantage of the owner's willingness to separate himself from land that has no value to his business purposes, and it just seems to dovetail very nicely with our own uses and focus on preservation. And to that, I'd just like to add, I'd like to thank the Wetland Trust for the consultation they've already given us on really how to assess that floodplain property, and a willingness they've expressed to help us manage it going forward. So it's not only preserving kind of the fields, but also from a standpoint of natural preservation and management.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you saying to me once that, I mean, even though it's right up against the embankment there, and the water level has risen perilously close, you said that in your knowledge, it has never flooded the house. Is that right?
No, it has not. Anyone looking at pictures of the house, the west gable, which is the one with that expressed flue for the basement kitchen, you'll notice there's a line of ash trees just outside the fence, and the water has been right up to there, which also at that level is across the road going over the creek, Route 66. But that really has been the limit. The fact that it's been there for 300 years now almost shows that the site was well chosen.
And Hoesens knew where they were putting it, I guess. Does anyone have any other questions? Do a last call for questions before we wrap up. Ed, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we say goodbye? Is there anything that you just find people need to know? I mean, I find it interesting. You've done tours before, and you mentioned to me some things that you find people tend to ask, common questions or common things of interest. That what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think as far as the Dutch house goes, it's a framing system completely different from the English systems like in New England that you see with the center chimney. A Dutch house frame is basically based on what they call an H-bent, which means each eave wall has got a post, and then there's this massive floor joist or anchor beam that runs front to back, from the front eave to the back eave. And it just seems that everyone who steps into one of these houses, that's the first thing they notice. These massive beams that are 6 inches thick and 12 to 15 inches tall on 4-foot centers. And with that, because there was not a plastered ceiling, people also comment on houses look relatively small from the outside, but once you get in, because the actual height of the ceilings in these better houses is literally 9 feet to the underside of the floorboards for the second story. The comment I do hear a lot from visitors here and other houses I've been in is just how much space these houses seem to have once you get inside them. The perspective is much larger than looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, and the attic is huge too.
And I think
very tall attic.
Well, that's another thing, and that's a benefit of the steep roof, because the roof rises so quickly. Obviously, a low flat roof means there's going to be lower headroom, but with the pitch is it rises 14 inches for every 12-footer run into the center of the building, I think would be the simplest way to explain it. So you have something, even though it's a 1.5-story house, where those rooms upstairs, even though you have the slope of a roof in there, all 4 bedrooms are still of a decent size.
Well, thanks for all your time today, Ed. Appreciate all your wisdom. And thanks everyone for joining and for watching in. One final call to action. I'm going to put that donation link up again. There it is. Please click it. Please subscribe to the newsletter. And let us know if there's, anything else you'd like to know. We can put it together in a newsletter and send that out as well. But Vicki, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, James, well, before we leave, I thought I just saw a message come up that a Barrett was about to ask a question. Did you see that?
I see. Oh, let's see. Yes. Here's one. Judy has a question. Judy, you can just type it in. This is it, Judy. Well, I see a question up there. What is the total budget that's required to raise in an ideal world? I think that would be for you, Vicki.
Didn't hear it. Could you say it again?
What is the total budget that is required to raise in an ideal world? How much do you need?
Well, actually, what we're looking for ideally is around $300,000. Let me see if I have the list here. I don't have the actual budget breakdown in front of me, but if the audience member will send me an email, I can provide them with that information. As a matter of fact, I think it might be on the website, on the new website.
Okay, and a couple of follow-up questions. How is the fundraising going, and what would be the annual budget to maintain?
Okay, I'll answer that first one, the second one first. I think the annual budget, from what I remember that Ed gave me, is about $12,000. Is that it, or is that just a stabilization, Ed?
No, I'm just looking at what is needed. We're talking about lawn maintenance. Won't be able to do it forever myself. We're looking at the insurances that will be needed so we can, both protect the building itself, although it's irreplaceable, but also the liability, of course. We're going to have an electric service. So again, I don't see anything huge in the way of cost, just some of these basic things. Also, as we get things rolling again, I'll be getting back out into the community with tradesmen to see who may be willing to volunteer some of their time. It's come and gone over the years. At one point, way back in the early days, 15 plus years ago, I actually had a full crew ready to go for this thing. And then we sort of got sidetracked with all the complications of getting a small not-for-profit up and going. And like I said, I think at this point, like I say, once we're a little better organized here, then I'd be happy to go back out again and see who I can pull in with the experience out of our local trades who's willing to volunteer some time.
Okay. I have a listing. I have the budget expenses. We would like to be able to, we have budgeted $30,000 for the property acquisition. That'll actually be between $30,000 and $40,000. We still have to we have to agree to a price with the owner. Then the historic structures report, the dendrochronology, and the basement archaeology. We think that'll be about $163,000. That is probably our most expensive activity that we'll be undertaking. Also, we will be producing some videos of the interior of the house, as well as information about the house provenance and the local area. And those are things that we can put on our website, as well as put on way signs, so that the casual visitor who comes when Ed is not there and who hasn't made an appointment, they will be able to see the house, at least see the interior of the house, and get an understanding of the house's history based on the little kiosks or visitor devices that we have outside on the lawn. People who want to see the interior of the house will have to make an appointment via the website, and Ed will set up a guided tour for that. Okay. And then, as I said, the maintenance is about $12,000, or between $12,000 and $20,000 a year. We'll know more as we get further along, and certainly when we have the HSR report, the historic structures report, that will tell us what we're going to need to raise funds for in the second phase. What other kinds of studies?
Vicki, if I may just supplement that, I just want to be clear with everyone. What we're trying to do now is just get the place acquired and be sure that the expenses for those first steps that we need to prepare for the actual stabilization work. And that doesn't mean that I won't, be continuing my own work. Like I said, the better weather here in the springtime, I'll be working on the roof. There's no cost for that. Maybe it bears repeating that I give my time to this house and will never take a penny for my work because I just feel it's the wrong thing to do. I'm just all in because I believe strongly in the project, and will do as much as I can by myself. And hopefully when we get better organized and have a little more money to play with, I'm certainly not going to be, at some point, all the exterior walls are going to have to be repointed. Damaged brick are going to have to be replaced because, again, it can't be preserved exactly as it is as far as the exterior goes. It has to be weather tight, and we're a long ways from that now.
And so, Ed, a follow-up question from, looks like Laurel. What is the total renovation to the exact historical house? Seems like it could be $1 million plus. What could be done with a couple of million?
Well, one of the things that originally, when the archive expressed an interest in throwing in with us, is so many of the groups that have an association here with the house, whether it's the archive or whatever it is, or if it's just architectural people. Deep into this, we've always looked at, because this is a study house, it's not going to be improved for meetings and the like, but there is enough room on the land, and it's a little odd, but the whole location is odd since the road actually was on the other side of the house originally. But the idea is to get a secondary and auxiliary building up, perhaps something looks like a Dutch barn, where the groups that have a vested interest in the house could actually have offices, whether, the archive needs a place for a library, just things like that. It may also then, within this structure, be a place, part of it could be dedicated for small meetings or fundraising or whatever for the groups. Again, I don't want us to be getting ahead of ourselves. I think we have a good goal here to prepare for the work. And everybody out there, thanks for tuning in. And we'll be sure to, once we get through this initial phase, be back to visit you and your wallets again. Let's just be honest about it. But at this point, we're just asking for enough so I can continue my work, and Vicki can move ahead with Carl on acquisition. I think we have a good outline and a good solid basis for moving ahead here.
But if you happen to have a couple of million, please don't let that stop you.
Well, yes, you could certainly spend a couple, like I said, to get up an auxiliary building, which is, like I said, I mentioned this separately as a direction. I mean, you have to have a direction, whether you can look at it and go, that's not happening now. We haven't even acquired the place yet, but it's what do you want to do long term? And that's been part of what's informed how you deal with a house. I mean, it took us early on, 15 years ago, quite a while back and forth in the board to decide that, okay, it's going to be a study house. And well, all right, but then we just have this house museum, which doesn't really work. I've been told that time and time again. People come once, they forget about it. It's why to have a dynamic place where there's a lot of, like, the archives interest or a family that's owned it, their interest. All of it's important to get everybody working together on this. So does that kind of
I think that's a great
touch on what?
Yeah, I think that's a great way.
Okay,
Unless there's any more questions, final chance. Of course, you can always reach out to the organization using that link that's right there. There's a contact form in there. If you have any other questions, they're very responsive. Vicki, how are you feeling? Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the call?
No, I'm very happy with the program. I'm very satisfied with it, and I just hope that people will respond in kind. I think that it's really a very important project, and we really want to get it moving.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
I would just like to add. Oh, sorry, James. I just wanted to add. Yeah, the house's significance is really incredible. It's not just for Columbia County or the Hudson River Valley. It really is an American house. And, lest we forget, this was a manor house. I mean, not as grand as some of those Virginia or Carolina places, but this does represent, and it also represents a style of architecture that was only prevalent in one of the 13 original colonies. And then we have our later history, and there's things we haven't even explored. I mean, the house was owned for over 100 years by the McKittrick family. I myself, at least, would like to understand a little more of their story, the Scots-Irish approach. It's just so much, like I said, there's so many things with this house that just represent the economic times in the county and in the country, the social aspects. And so that's why I say it's really kind of a very important American house.
Right. And side of enslavement and abolition under Charles Marriott. I mean, it really is so many layers of American history that it truly is an important house. So thank you all for your time and for watching. I believe this is the end, but we'll be doing more of these in the future because this was really fun. And gonna wrap it up now. But Vicki and Ed, if you can stay on after, I'm gonna end the call, but we need to stay on so that the footage can upload into the server. Okay, so don't leave. You two, don't leave. Everyone else. Thanks so much for watching and staying with us. Okay, bye bye.